The morning sun streamed through the stained glass windows of St. Mary's Church as Michael adjusted his bow tie for the 100th time. Today was supposed to be the happiest day of his life. After 3 years of dating, he was finally marrying Sarah, the woman who had brought light back into his world after his wife's tragic death 5 years ago. 8-year-old. Tommy sat quietly in the front pew, his small hands fidgeting with the ring-bearer's pillow. The boy had been unusually quiet all week, which Michael attributed to normal wedding jitters. Tommy had grown close to Sarah over the past 2 years, and Michael thought his son was just nervous about the big changes ahead. Sarah looked absolutely radiant in her white dress as she walked down the aisle. Her blonde hair was perfectly styled, and her blue eyes sparkled with what everyone assumed was joy. The guests smiled warmly as she passed, whispering about how beautiful she looked and how lucky Michael was to find love again. Father Martinez began the ceremony with his usual warmth and dignity. The church was filled with family and friends, all celebrating this new beginning for Michael and Tommy. Sarah's family had traveled from across the country, and Michael's colleagues from the law firm were there to support him. Everything seemed perfect. As the ceremony progressed, Tommy kept shifting in his seat. His grandmother, who was sitting beside him, noticed his restlessness and gently placed her hand on his shoulder. The boy looked up at her with troubled eyes, but she simply smiled and whispered for him to be still. Michael and Sarah exchanged their personal vows, bringing tears to many eyes in the congregation. Sarah spoke about how grateful she was to become part of their little family, and how she promised to love and protect both Michael and Tommy. Her words seemed sincere, and Michael felt his heart swell with happiness. The photographer moved quietly around the church, capturing every precious moment. The flowers were beautiful, the music was perfect, and the atmosphere was filled with love and celebration. Sarah's maid of honor, her sister Jessica, stood proudly beside her, occasionally dabbing her eyes with a tissue. Tommy had been unusually observant in the weeks leading up to the wedding. Being a curious child, he had noticed things that adults often missed. He had seen Sarah making mysterious phone calls late at night when she thought he was asleep. He had watched her quickly close her laptop whenever he walked into the room. Most troubling of all, he had heard her talking to someone about money and plans that didn't include his father. The night before the wedding, Tommy had overheard a conversation that made his stomach twist with worry. Sarah had been talking to someone on the phone in the garden, thinking everyone was asleep. Her voice was different, colder and more calculating than the sweet tone she used around his father. She had mentioned something about insurance policies and how everything would work out perfectly after the wedding. As Father Martinez continued with the traditional ceremony, Tommy's mind raced with confusion and fear. He loved his father more than anything in the world, and the thought of someone hurting him was unbearable. But how could he tell his dad about his suspicions on the most important day of his life? Would anyone even believe an 8-year-old boy? The congregation rose for a hymn, and Tommy found himself looking around at all the happy faces. Everyone seemed so convinced that this was a fairy tale wedding, a perfect second chance at love for his widowed father. But Tommy felt a growing certainty that something was terribly wrong. Sarah had been so kind to him over the past 2 years. She had taken him to movies, helped with his homework, and even taught him to ride his bike. But lately her kindness felt different, forced and artificial. When his father wasn't around, she seemed distracted and impatient, always checking her phone or making excuses to leave the room. The boy remembered his mother, who had died when he was only 3. He had vague but warm memories of her gentle voice and loving embrace. His father had shown him pictures and told him stories about how much his mother had loved them both. Michael had been heartbroken for years, throwing himself into work and raising Tommy alone until Sarah came into their lives. When Sarah first started dating his father, Tommy had been hopeful and excited. The house had been quiet and sad for so long, and Sarah brought laughter and energy back into their home. She cooked elaborate dinners, organized fun family outings, and seemed genuinely interested in being part of their family. But children often notice things that adults miss, and Tommy had begun to see cracks in Sarah's perfect facade. He had caught her going through his father's papers when she thought no one was looking. He had seen her taking pictures of important documents with her phone. Most disturbing of all, he had witnessed her meeting with a man he didn't recognize in a parking lot, exchanging envelopes and having intense conversations. Tommy, quote, S 8-year-old mind couldn't fully understand what he was witnessing, but his instincts told him that something was wrong. He had tried to tell his father about some of these incidents, but Michael was so happy and in love that he dismissed Tommy's concerns as a child's overactive imagination. As the ceremony reached the crucial moment, Father Martinez asked if anyone had any reason why Michael and Sarah should not be wed. The traditional question hung in the air, and Tommy felt his heart pounding in his chest. This was his moment, perhaps his only chance to protect his father from whatever Sarah was planning. The church fell silent, as it always did during this part of the ceremony. No one expected anyone to speak up. These words were just a formality, a tradition that rarely resulted in any actual objections. The guests smiled knowingly, waiting for the ceremony to continue toward the joyful conclusion they all anticipated. But Tommy could no longer stay silent. The weight of what he knew, combined with his desperate love for his father, gave him courage beyond his years. His small voice cut through the silence like a knife, shocking everyone in the church and setting in motion events that would change everything. Wait. Stop. Please don't marry her, Daddy. Tommy's small voice echoed through the church like a thunderclap. Every head turned toward the front pew where the 8-year-old boy stood trembling, his face flushed with determination and fear. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the soft gasp of shocked guests. Michael Quota's face went pale as he stared at his son in disbelief. This was his worst nightmare, his wedding day turning into a disaster in front of everyone he cared about. Sarah's eyes flashed with anger before she quickly composed herself, putting on a concerned expression that fooled most of the guests. Tommy, sweetheart, what's wrong? Sarah asked in her sweetest voice, though those who looked closely could see the tension in her jaw. She took a step toward the boy, but Tommy instinctively moved back, closer to his grandmother. Father Martinez looked uncertain, clearly not expecting this kind of interruption in his 40 years of performing weddings. The photographer lowered his camera, unsure whether he should continue documenting what was unfolding. The guests began murmuring among themselves, some looking sympathetic while others appeared annoyed at the disruption. Michael knelt down to Tommy's level, his voice gentle but firm. Son, this isn't the time or place. We can talk about whatever is bothering you after the ceremony, okay? But Tommy shook his head vigorously, tears beginning to stream down his cheeks. No, Daddy. You have to listen to me now. She's not who you think she is. She's planning something bad. The murmurs in the congregation grew louder. Some guests looked at each other with raised eyebrows, while others felt genuinely concerned for the little boy who seemed so distressed. Sarah's sister Jessica moved closer, ready to help diffuse the situation, but Sarah subtly held up her hand to stop her. Tommy, honey, I know change can be scary, Sarah said, her voice dripping with false compassion. But I love your daddy and I love you too. We're going to be a happy family together. Tommy's grandmother, Eleanor, studied her grandson's face carefully. She had raised 5 children of her own and had learned to recognize when a child was truly troubled versus simply acting out. Something in Tommy's expression convinced her that this was more than just wedding day nerves. What kind of bad things, sweetheart? Eleanor asked gently, ignoring the disapproving looks from other family members. Her question gave Tommy the encouragement he needed to continue. She talks to someone on the phone about Daddy's insurance. Money, Tommy blurted out, his words tumbling over each other in his haste to get them out. She said something about how everything would work out after they got married, and she meets with a strange man and gives him papers. The church erupted in shocked whispers. Michael looked stunned, unsure how to process his son's accusations. Sarah's face remained calm, but her hands clenched into fists at her sides. That's absolutely ridiculous, Sarah said with a nervous laugh. Michael, your son has quite an imagination. Maybe he's been watching too many detective shows on television. But Tommy wasn't finished. The floodgates had opened, and weeks of Worry and confusion poured out of the little boy. I saw her taking pictures of Daddy's important papers when you were at work. And she was looking through your desk. She always stops talking on the phone when we come in the room. Michael felt his world beginning to tilt. Part of him wanted to dismiss Tommy's words as childish fantasy, but another part recognized the ring of truth in his son's desperate voice. He had noticed Sarah's secretive phone calls but had attributed them to wedding planning or conversations with her family. Dr. Patricia Holmes, a family friend and child psychologist who was attending the wedding, stood up quietly from her seat. She had been watching Tommy carefully throughout his outburst and recognized the signs of a child telling the truth under extreme stress. "Michael," she said softly. Children Tommy's age rarely make up stories this detailed unless they've witnessed something that truly concerned them. Sarah's mask began to slip slightly. "This is ridiculous. I'm being accused by a child who's clearly having some kind of breakdown. Can't we just continue with the ceremony and deal with this nonsense later?" But Tommy wasn't done. His next words sent shockwaves through the entire congregation. "She said her real name isn't even Sarah," he cried out. "I heard her tell the man on the phone that Michael would never find out about her real name or what happened to her other husband." The church fell completely silent except for the sound of Tommy's sobbing. Even Sarah couldn't maintain her composure at this revelation. Her face went white, and she took an involuntary step backward. Michael felt as if the ground was disappearing beneath his feet. "Other husband," he whispered, his voice barely audible. Eleanor stood up and walked over to Tommy, putting her protective arms around her grandson. Years of experience as a retired social worker had taught her to recognize dangerous situations, and every instinct she had was screaming warnings. "Sarah," Eleanor said firmly, "I think you need to explain what Tommy is talking about." Sarah looked around the church desperately, seeing skeptical and concerned faces staring back at her. The beautiful wedding she had planned so carefully was crumbling around her, and she knew she was trapped. "This is insane," she said, her voice rising with panic. "You're all going to believe the wild stories of an 8-year-old boy? He's obviously jealous and trying to sabotage our wedding." But Detective Robert Chen, one of Michael's law school friends who had become a close family friend, was already reaching for his phone. Something in the boy's specific accusations, particularly the mention of insurance money and another husband, had triggered his professional instincts. Tommy looked up at his father with tears streaming down his face. "I'm sorry, Daddy. I know you love her, but I was scared she was going to hurt you like what happened to Mommy. I couldn't let that happen." Michael knelt down and pulled his son into his arms, his heart breaking for the burden this little boy had been carrying alone. At the same time, his mind was racing with questions and growing suspicions about the woman he had been about to marry. The wedding guests sat in stunned silence, realizing they were witnessing something far more serious than a child's tantrum. Some were already quietly taking out their phones, while others simply stared in shock at the unfolding drama. Sarah realized that her carefully constructed facade was crumbling rapidly. The sweet, loving woman she had pretended to be for 3 years was disappearing, replaced by someone far more calculating and dangerous. She looked toward the church exits, calculating her options as the walls closed in around her. Detective Chen stepped forward, his professional demeanor cutting through the chaos of the moment. "Sarah, I think we need to have a conversation. Tommy's accusations are quite specific, and frankly, they match patterns I've seen in insurance fraud cases." Sarah's eyes darted around the church like a trapped animal. The fairy tale wedding had become her worst nightmare, and she could see her carefully laid plans unraveling with each passing second. Her hands trembled as she clutched her bouquet, the white roses now seeming to mock the purity they were supposed to represent. "I don't have to listen to this," Sarah said, her voice no longer sweet but sharp and defensive. "This is harassment based on the fantasies of a confused child." Michael stood up slowly, still holding Tommy close. His legal training was kicking in now, and he began to see the situation through the lens of evidence and probability rather than emotion. Tommy had never been a child to make up elaborate stories, and the specific details he had mentioned were troubling. "Sarah," Michael said carefully, "if Tommy is wrong, then we can clear this up easily. Why don't you explain these phone calls he's talking about? And what did he mean about your real name? The wedding guests watched in fascination and horror as the drama unfolded before them. Some were already texting family members who hadn't attended, sharing the unbelievable story of the wedding that had turned into a criminal investigation. Father Martinez, who had seen his share of wedding drama over the years, stepped forward diplomatically. Perhaps we should take this discussion to my office where we can sort everything out privately. But Detective Chen shook his head. Actually, Father, I think this needs to be addressed right here and now. Sarah, Tommy mentioned that you told someone your real name wasn't Sarah. What is your real name? Sarah's carefully applied makeup couldn't hide the perspiration beading on her forehead. She looked toward the church doors again, measuring the distance and wondering if she could make a run for it. But the aisles were packed with guests, and she knew she would never make it. My name is Sarah, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. Sarah Michelle Thompson, just like on all our wedding documents. Detective Chen pulled out his phone and began typing. I'm going to run a quick background check right now. If everything is legitimate, we can put this whole misunderstanding to rest. Tommy pulled away from his father and pointed at Sarah with a shaking finger. She told the man on the phone that her real name was Linda something, and she said she had done this before with someone named Richard. The name Richard sent a visible shudder through Sarah's body. Several guests noticed her reaction, and the murmurs in the church grew louder. Michael felt a cold dread settling in his stomach as he began to piece together the implications of his son's words. Eleanor, who had been watching Sarah carefully throughout the exchange, spoke up from her position next to Tommy. Sarah, dear, you've gone very pale. Are you feeling all right? I'm fine, Sarah snapped, dropping all pretense of her usual gentle demeanor. This is just an incredibly stressful situation. Imagine being accused of being a criminal at your own wedding. Dr. Holmes approached the group slowly, her trained eye observing both Tommy and Sarah. Tommy, sweetheart, can you tell us more about these phone calls you overheard? When did they happen? Tommy wiped his nose with the back of his hand and looked up at the kind woman he had known since he was a baby. Last Tuesday night when Daddy was working late, she was in the garden talking really quietly, but I heard her from my bedroom window. She said something about how Richard had been stupid and got caught, but she was smarter. Michael felt his legs go weak. Richard was an uncommon enough name that it couldn't be a coincidence. Combined with Tommy's other accusations about insurance, money, and fake identities, a terrifying picture was beginning to emerge. Detective Chen's phone buzzed with a notification. He looked at the screen and his expression grew grim. Sarah Michelle Thompson doesn't exist in any database before 3 years ago. However, Linda Marie Thompson has quite an interesting criminal record. Sarah's bouquet fell to the floor with a soft thud as she realized the game was over. The beautiful white roses scattered across the church's marble floor, their petals beginning to separate and drift away like her carefully constructed lies. That's impossible, she said weakly, but everyone could see she was defeated. There must be some mistake in your systems. Tommy looked up at his father with relief flooding his small face. I was so scared, Daddy. I didn't want her to hurt you like she hurt that other man. I heard her say that Richard died and that's how she got money before. The implications of Tommy's words hit everyone in the church like a physical blow. Michael staggered backward, supported by his best man as he realized how close he had come to potentially deadly deception. Detective Chen stepped closer to Sarah, his hand moving instinctively toward his badge. Linda Marie Thompson, also known as Linda Richards, also known as Sarah Michelle Thompson, wanted in connection with the suspicious death of Richard Patterson in Denver, Colorado 2 years ago. Sarah finally stopped pretending. The mask she had worn for 3 years fell away completely, revealing someone cold and calculating beneath a sweet exterior. You have no proof of anything. Richard died of a heart attack. It was natural causes. A heart attack caused by digitalis poisoning, Detective Chen continued, reading from his phone. Found in his system during the autopsy, though the case remained open due to insufficient evidence for prosecution. Michael felt sick as he remembered Sarah's interest in gardening and her extensive knowledge of plants. She had often made him herbal teas and special meals, claiming she wanted to take care of his health. The thought of what could have happened After their marriage made him physically nauseous, Tommy ran to his father and hugged him tightly. "I'm sorry I had to stop your wedding, Daddy, but I was so scared something bad would happen to you." Michael lifted his son and held him close, overwhelmed with gratitude for the courage this little boy had shown. "You saved my life, Tommy. You were so brave to speak up when it was hard." Sarah looked around the church one last time at the faces staring back at her with horror and disgust. Her beautiful wedding dress, which had cost thousands of dollars, now felt like a costume in a play that had gone terribly wrong. "This is all speculation and hearsay," she said desperately. "You can't prove anything." But Detective Chen was already calling for backup, and several of the male guests had quietly positioned themselves near the exits to ensure she couldn't flee. The fairy tale wedding had become a crime scene, and Sarah's dreams of a wealthy widow's life had turned into her worst nightmare. 2 patrol cars arrived at St. Mary's Church within minutes of Detective Chen's call. The officers entered quietly through the side door, trying to minimize the disruption to what was already an incredibly tense situation. The wedding guests sat in stunned silence, many still unable to process that they were witnessing a potential murder suspect being apprehended at what should have been a joyous celebration. Sarah stood frozen at the altar, her wedding dress now seeming like a mockery of everything it was supposed to represent. The delicate lace and intricate beadwork that had taken months to perfect couldn't hide the cold calculation in her eyes as she realized her 3-year plan was crumbling around her. "Linda Marie Thompson," Detective Chen said formally. "You need to come with us for questioning regarding the death of Richard Patterson and possible fraud charges related to identity theft." "I'm not going anywhere," Sarah said defiantly. "This is my wedding day, and you're ruining it based on the wild imagination of a child." But Tommy stepped forward again, his small voice carrying surprising strength. "Tell them about the papers you gave to that man in the parking lot. Tell them about the pictures you took of Daddy's insurance papers." Michael felt his heart break as he watched his son's courage in the face of such an adult situation. At 8 years old, Tommy was demonstrating more wisdom and bravery than most adults ever would. The boy had risked everything to protect his father, even though he knew it might make his dad angry or sad. Officer Martinez, one of the responding policemen, approached Sarah carefully. "Ma'am, we need you to come with us voluntarily. You can cooperate now, or we can do this the hard way, but either way you're coming to the station." Dr. Holmes knelt down beside Tommy and spoke softly to him. "Tommy, you did exactly the right thing. It takes incredible courage to speak up when you see something wrong, especially when it's hard for adults to believe you." Tommy nodded solemnly. "I was scared nobody would listen to me because I'm just a kid, but I couldn't let her hurt my daddy." Eleanor pulled her grandson close, tears streaming down her face as she realized how much responsibility this little boy had been carrying alone. "Sweetheart, why didn't you tell me what you were worried about?" "I tried to tell Daddy, but he was so happy," Tommy explained, "and I wasn't sure if I understood everything right. But when Father Martinez asked if anyone had a reason they shouldn't get married, I knew I had to say something." Michael knelt down to Tommy's level again, his own eyes filled with tears. "Son, I should have listened to you better. I was so caught up in my own happiness that I didn't pay attention to your concerns. Can you forgive me?" Tommy hugged his father tightly. "I forgive you, Daddy. I just wanted to keep you safe like you keep me safe." The photographer who had been documenting the ceremony found himself in the surreal position of photographing what might become evidence in a criminal case. He quietly took pictures of the scene, knowing that this would be one of the most unusual weddings he had ever covered. Sarah, Quota's sister Jessica, approached cautiously, her face pale with shock. "Linda, or Sarah, whatever your name is, what have you done? Our whole family flew here for this wedding. We've been supporting you and loving you, and you've been lying to all of us." Sarah looked at her sister with something approaching regret. "Jess, you wouldn't understand. I've been taking care of myself since I was 16. Sometimes you have to do whatever it takes to survive." "Survive?" Jessica's voice rose with indignation. "You call potentially murdering innocent men surviving? These aren't survival tactics, Linda. This is evil. This..." Detective Chen had been coordinating with his colleagues at the Denver Police Department through text messages. The information he was receiving painted an increasingly disturbing picture of Sarah's past activities. "Linda," Detective Chen said, "we've just confirmed that you collected a $500,000 life insurance policy on Richard Patterson. We've also discovered that before Richard, there was a James Morrison in Phoenix who died under similar circumstances. You collected $300,000 from his policy." The church gasped collectively as the full scope of Sarah's deception became clear. This wasn't just about Michael and Tommy. There were other victims, other families who had been destroyed by this woman's greed and manipulation. Michael felt physically ill as he processed the information. "How many men have you done this to?" he asked quietly. Sarah straightened up, and for a moment her mask of innocence disappeared completely. In its place was someone hard and calculating, someone who had learned to view other people as nothing more than opportunities for financial gain. "Men are so easy," she said with chilling coldness. "Find a lonely widower with money and children. Be kind to the kids, cook nice dinners, play the perfect girlfriend for a few years. They fall in love with the idea of having a mother for their children and a wife to take care of them. They never suspect that someone could be patient enough to plan for 3 years. The guests in the church recoiled from her words. Several people covered their mouths in horror, while others simply stared in disbelief at the transformation of the woman they thought they knew. Tommy pressed closer to his father. "Daddy, I'm glad you're safe now." Michael lifted his son and held him protectively. "Me too, buddy. Me too." Officer Martinez placed handcuffs on Sarah's wrists as she stood in her beautiful wedding dress. The contrast between her appearance and her actions was jarring. She looked like every little girl's dream of a perfect bride, but her words revealed someone capable of calculated murder. "You have the right to remain silent," Officer Martinez began, but Sarah interrupted him. "This isn't over," she said, looking directly at Michael. "You'll never prove I did anything to Richard or James. They both died of natural causes." Detective Chen shook his head. "Actually, Linda, we've been building a case against you for months. Richard's family never believed his death was natural, and they hired a private investigator. We've been watching you since you moved here and started dating Michael." Sarah's confidence finally cracked completely. "You've been watching me. We had to be careful," Detective Chen explained. "We needed to catch you in the act of planning another crime. Tommy's testimony today, combined with the evidence we've been gathering, should be more than enough to ensure you never hurt anyone else again." Father Martinez, who had been silent through most of the confrontation, finally spoke. "I've been performing weddings for 40 years, and I've never been more grateful that a ceremony was interrupted. Tommy, you are a hero." As the police escorted Sarah out of the church, her wedding dress trailing behind her like a symbol of broken dreams and shattered illusions, the wedding guests began to process the magnitude of what they had witnessed. They had come expecting to celebrate love and new beginnings, but instead, they had seen evil exposed and innocent lives saved. The days following the interrupted wedding were surreal for Michael and Tommy. Their house, which had been filled with wedding decorations and Sarah's belongings just a week earlier, now felt empty and strange. Michael had spent the better part of 3 days removing all traces of the woman who had nearly destroyed their lives. Tommy seemed to handle the aftermath better than his father. Children often adapt more quickly to dramatic changes, and Tommy felt an enormous sense of relief. Now that the secret he had been carrying was finally out in the open, he helped his father pack Sarah's things, chattering about how much quieter the house was without her constant phone calls. Detective Chen visited them regularly to update them on the investigation. The evidence against Sarah, whose real name was indeed Linda Marie Thompson, was overwhelming. Her laptop contained detailed financial research on Michael's assets, insurance policies, and investment accounts. She had even researched the best methods to simulate heart attacks using various plant-based toxins. "We found a notebook in her apartment with detailed plans," Detective Chen explained to Michael during one of their meetings. "She had been documenting your daily routines, your health habits, and even Tommy's school schedule. This level of planning suggests she was getting ready to move to the final phase of her plan." Michael shuddered at the thought of how close he had come to becoming another victim. How long do you think she would have waited after the wedding? Based on the pattern with her previous victims, probably 6 to 8 months, Detective Chen replied. She needed time to establish herself as the grieving widow and to make sure there were no immediate suspicions about the death. Tommy, who was coloring at the kitchen table while the adults talked, looked up from his artwork. Detective Chen, will she be able to hurt anyone else now? Detective Chen smiled at the boy who had shown such remarkable courage. No, Tommy. She's going to be in prison for a very long time. You made sure she can't hurt anyone else ever again. Sir. Investigation revealed that Linda had been operating this scheme for nearly a decade. Before Richard Patterson and James Morrison, there had been at least 2 other victims in different states. She was methodical and patient, spending years in each relationship to avoid suspicion, and carefully researching her targets before making contact. Michael quote, S. law firm colleagues were amazed by the story, particularly at Tommy's role in exposing the truth. Several of them visited to offer support and to tell Tommy what a hero he was. The boy enjoyed the attention but seemed more interested in getting back to his normal routine of school and playing with his friends. Eleanor, Tommy's grandmother, had been staying with them since the wedding day to help process everything that had happened. She was incredibly proud of her grandson but also worried about the psychological impact of carrying such a heavy burden at such a young age. Have you thought about counseling for Tommy? She asked Michael one evening as they watched the boy play in the backyard. He handled this situation with remarkable maturity, but he's still just 8 years old. Michael nodded. Dr. Holmes recommended a child psychologist who specializes in trauma. We have an appointment next week. The story had made national news, with reporters calling to interview the family about the dramatic wedding day revelation. Michael declined most requests, wanting to protect Tommy's privacy. But he did agree to one television interview to help warn other potential victims about the dangers of romance fraud. During the interview, Michael spoke about the importance of listening to children and trusting their instincts. Tommy tried to tell me about his concerns several times, but I dismissed them because I was so happy to have found love again. I almost paid for that mistake with my life. The interviewer asked Tommy how he had found the courage to speak up during the wedding ceremony. Tommy thought carefully before answering, showing the same thoughtfulness that had helped him recognize Sarah's deception. I kept thinking about my mommy, Tommy said quietly. Daddy always tells me stories about how brave she was and how she would do anything to protect our family. I thought she would want me to protect Daddy the same way she would have. The interview brought tears to many viewers' eyes and generated hundreds of supportive messages for the family. Parents wrote to say that Tommy's story had inspired them to listen more carefully to their own children's concerns. 3 weeks after the failed wedding, Detective Chen called with significant news. Linda had agreed to plead guilty to multiple charges in exchange for a life sentence without the possibility of parole. She would never be free again. She finally realized that the evidence against her was overwhelming, Detective Chen explained. The families of her previous victims will finally have justice, and you and Tommy can move forward, knowing she can never hurt anyone else. Michael felt a weight lift from his shoulders that he hadn't even realized he was carrying. The legal proceedings would be minimal now, and they could begin to truly heal from the trauma of discovering they had been living with a potential murderer. Tommy, S school, had been incredibly supportive throughout the ordeal. His teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, had worked with the school counselor to help his classmates understand what had happened without frightening them. Several parents had reached out to offer playdates and support for Tommy. One afternoon, Tommy came home from school with a drawing he had made during art class. It showed him, his father, and his grandmother standing in front of their house, all smiling brightly under a sunny yellow sky. Notably absent was any figure representing Sarah. "This is our family now," Tommy explained to his father. "Just the people who really love each other." Michael hugged his son tightly, overwhelmed with gratitude for the wisdom and courage of this remarkable little boy. Tommy had not only saved his life but had also taught him valuable lessons about trust, intuition, and the importance of listening to those we love. Dr. Patricia Holmes continued to check on Tommy regularly, amazed by his resilience, and emotional intelligence. He's processing this experience in a very healthy way, she told Michael. His actions show that he has a strong moral compass and the courage to do what's right even when it's difficult. As they settled into their new normal, Michael began to appreciate the quiet peace of their home without Sarah's constant presence. He realized that what he had mistaken for love had actually been manipulation, and that true peace came from authentic relationships built on trust and honesty. Tommy thrived in the aftermath of the crisis, seeming more confident and secure than he had in months. He had proven to himself and everyone around him that his voice mattered, and that even children could make a difference when they spoke up about injustice. 6 months after the wedding that never was, Michael and Tommy had established a comfortable new routine. The house felt peaceful in a way it hadn't in years, and both father and son seemed more relaxed and genuinely happy. The shadow that Sarah had cast over their lives was finally lifting, replaced by a stronger bond between father and son. Tommy had become something of a local celebrity after the story made national news. Children at his school looked up to him as the boy who had saved his father's life, and parents in the community often pointed him out as an example of courage and wisdom. Despite the attention, Tommy remained remarkably humble about his actions. "Just did what anyone would do to protect their family," he would say when people praised him for his bravery. His maturity continued to amaze the adults around him, though he was still very much an 8-year-old boy who loved video games and riding his bicycle. Michael had undergone significant changes as well. The experience had taught him to slow down and pay closer attention to the people he loved. He made a conscious effort to listen more carefully to Tommy's concerns and observations, recognizing that children often notice things that adults miss. Their evening routine now included what they called talk time, where they would sit together and share anything that was on their minds. These conversations had brought them closer together and helped Tommy feel that his voice was valued and heard. Detective Chen had become a regular visitor and family friend. He often stopped by to update them on the ongoing investigation into Linda's other crimes and to check on Tommy's well-being. The detective was impressed by how well the boy was handling the aftermath of such a traumatic experience. "Tommy has taught me something important about trusting children's instincts," Detective Chen told Michael during one of his visits. "We often dismiss kids' concerns as imagination, but in this case, a child's observations saved your life and prevented future crimes." The investigation into Linda's past had revealed an even more extensive criminal history than initially suspected. Police departments in 5 different states had connected her to suspicious deaths dating back 12 years. The total amount she had stolen through insurance fraud exceeded $2 million. Families of her previous victims had reached out to thank Michael and Tommy for finally bringing Linda to justice. Richard Patterson's sister called to express her gratitude, explaining that her family had never believed Richard's death was natural, but had been unable to prove their suspicions. "Your son's courage gave our family the closure we desperately needed," she told Michael through tears. Richard would have been so proud of Tommy for speaking up and protecting others. The media attention gradually died down, allowing the family to return to a more normal life. Tommy went back to being a regular 3rd grader who worried about spelling tests and looked forward to recess. However, his experience had given him a confidence and awareness that set him apart from his peers. His teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, noticed positive changes in Tommy's behavior at school. He was more likely to speak up if he saw bullying or unfairness, and he had become a natural leader among his classmates. His experience had taught him that his voice mattered, and that standing up for what was right was more important than avoiding conflict. Michael S. law firm created a scholarship in Tommy's honor for children who demonstrated exceptional courage in difficult circumstances. The annual award would help other young people who had shown bravery in protecting themselves or others from harm. During the first scholarship ceremony, Tommy was asked to speak to the audience about courage. Standing at the podium in his best suit, he looked remarkably composed for such a young child. "Courage isn't about not being scared," Tommy said, his voice clear and strong. "I was really scared when I had to stop my dad's wedding. But sometimes, being scared means you're doing something important. If you see something wrong, you have to speak up, even if grown-ups might not believe you at first. The audience gave him a standing ovation, many wiping away tears at the wisdom of this remarkable child. Michael watched from the front row with immense pride, knowing that his son had already accomplished more good in his 8 years than many people do in a lifetime. Eleanor, who had become a permanent fixture in their lives since the wedding incident, often marveled at her grandson's resilience. "That boy has an old soul," she would tell her friends. "He's been through something that would traumatize many adults, but he's used the experience to become stronger and more compassionate." As the 1-year anniversary of the interrupted wedding approached, Michael and Tommy decided to do something positive to mark the date. They organized a community safety workshop focused on recognizing signs of manipulation and fraud in relationships. Tommy helped design flyers and even spoke to other children about trusting their instincts. The workshop was well attended, with many people sharing their own stories of narrow escapes from dangerous relationships. Tommy listened intently to each story, offering encouraging words to both children and adults who had found the courage to speak up about their concerns. Dr. Holmes, who continued to monitor Tommy's psychological well-being, was amazed by his continued growth and development. "He's transformed a traumatic experience into a source of strength and purpose," she observed. "His ability to help others while processing his own experience shows remarkable emotional intelligence." Michael had begun dating again, but very slowly and carefully. He had learned to look for red flags and to trust Tommy's impressions of new people in their lives. More importantly, he had learned that his relationship with his son was the most important one he would ever have. On a quiet Sunday evening, as they sat together working on a jigsaw puzzle, Tommy looked up at his father with a serious expression. "Daddy, are you happy now?" he asked. Michael smiled at his son, feeling a peace and contentment he hadn't experienced in years. "Yes, buddy, I'm very happy. Are you?" Tommy nodded emphatically. "I'm happy too. Our family is perfect just the way it is." Michael reached over and hugged his son, grateful every day for the courage and wisdom of this extraordinary little boy, who had saved not only his life but also their future together. Tommy had shown that sometimes the smallest voices carry the most important messages, and that love truly means protecting the people who matter most, no matter the cost. Their story became a reminder to communities everywhere about the importance of listening to children, trusting instincts, and having the courage to speak up when something doesn't feel right. Tommy's bravery had not only saved his father, but had also prevented future victims and brought justice to families who had been waiting years for answers. As they finished their puzzle that evening, both Michael and Tommy knew that their real adventure was just beginning, building a life based on trust, honesty, and the unbreakable bond between a father and the son who had saved his life.